Playing. Good morning, everyone. Morning. That's very cheery. It's early in the week yet, right?
That's right.
Lots of energy left. Welcome to Breakout 2715. Does that mean it's a 2,000 level course or session? Wow, we usually do 300 level. So this is either much, much harder or a little bit higher level, a little bit easier. We'll see. Kind of depends upon where we want to take it. My name is Paul Larson. I'm a group program manager at Microsoft. And with me today is Valerie Robb. She's a senior program manager at Microsoft. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you.
We want to thank you very much for being here today. Really appreciate it. We work for a very specialized team at Microsoft. A few of you know us from time working with you over the many years. It's a very specific session, right? As you can tell from the title, we're going to be talking about designing Microsoft Azure solutions that connect to existing systems. Some people call them legacy systems. We like IBM's phrase, they're heritage systems. Right? Most of us have adopted them. I don't know if anyone here has been around since the very early days, potentially. Congratulations. Been working in this space for maybe 24 years. I started at Attachmate, and I'm here at Microsoft the last 20 years. Valerie comes to us with many years of industry experience as well, working in the real world. She's one of our best COBOL programmers back in the office. And as you know, we have an IBM mainframe data center right in Redmond, so just like you, we're a commercial customer. And speaking of which, I know, raising hands, I just want to get just a general feeling. We want to know the type of people in the audience. So how many folks here are actually customers, end user customers of Microsoft? Just about 2/3. And then partners, ISV, solution provider partners? Okay. And then other, that's fine. So we're probably going to be talking mostly in terms of, to the customer. But if you're a partner, you know how to accept that information and apply it to working with your customers and ours. The other thing about our team is that it's really good that you came here in person, although we do welcome those watching online and those that are watching the recording later in the future. Thank you again for attending. Because you want to take the advantage of coming up and talking to us after the session, certainly in the booth. We're going to be there absolutely all afternoon. We'll try to go there right afterwards as well. We'll be available after the session outside. We're going to take question and answers during the last 15 minutes, and if you can, try to come up to the microphone. If not, we'll repeat them. But you want to take advantage of coming and talking to us because we're a very unique team at Microsoft. We spend quite a bit of time working directly with our customers. It's the history of the team. It started back in 1986, developing OS/2-based controllers for IBM systems, data link control, and then it's evolved quite a bit over the many years. We spent a lot of time, Valerie in particular spends almost all of her time on the phone, working with partners on site for proof of concepts and support cases, and then briefings, that sort of thing. We have a great support team, great field, great partners, but we still do a lot of direct customer contact. All right, with that, let's get started. So just a level set. This is basically how we describe the session. We understand that our customers need to be able to reach out and do a better job of interacting with their employees, with their end customers, with their partners. And then one of the ways you can do that is with modern cloud applications, certainly web applications. You're looking at doing more mobile applications. How many folks here use BizTalk or Workflow Foundations? You want to orchestrate processes and stitch together multiple applications. And of course, the foundation of this session is stitching together Windows or Azure applications to existing IBM mainframe and AS400 and other IBM platforms. And so it's been a challenge over the last few years to develop applications for Azure, these different composite applications. And so what we've done recently is Microsoft has developed a set of technologies that make developing, deploying, and supporting cloud applications much easier. And what we call that is something, it's called App Service. And App Service is composed of technology that allows you to create all four of the common applications for the cloud. Of course, web applications. That's how you reach out and have a web portal in the cloud to your customers, to your partners, and even your employees. Mobile apps. You can develop an application using App Service and the technologies we're going to show today in terms of connectors to the mainframe that will generate the stub for the mobile applications regardless of the platform. And at the end of the session, I'll point you to some other sessions where they're actually going to demonstrate that capability. Logic Apps is what we're calling the workflow, the ability to stitch together different things, have a recurrence, start a process off. And the connectors we're going to talk about today, they're over time being modified to support Logic Apps. It takes a little extra code to do that, so we can support things like triggers and, more importantly, actions, how to interoperate with the back-end mainframe system. And again, when I say mainframe, I mean any IBM platform. It could be anywhere IBM WebSphere MQ is running, anywhere DB2 and Formix is running. Those are all Linux, Unix, Windows, mainframe, ZOS, IBM i5OS, AS400, OS400. I'm missing any? And so we have those data centers, of course, in our lab as well. But the focus for us are what we call API apps. That's how we've mapped our connectors for IBM systems. And when we come to talking about API apps that work with the new app service in Azure, we have 3 that we've developed so far. Now, we just started working on the actual Azure Cloud API app microservices, I think at the end of October, if I remember right. And up until that time, we were actually developing new cloud BizTalk adapters, and those have transformed into this new platform, app service with API app connectors. And we chose to do these 3 based upon feedback from you, our customers and our partners. First and foremost, we think the most popular connector out of the box is going to be connector for IBM WebSphere MQ. And so that's what we started working on in October. Not only did we develop the high-end API app starting in October, we started with a low-end, fully .NET managed client for MQ. And as Valerie will talk, you no longer need to have an IBM footprint on our platform to connect to MQ. And that's really exciting. And one of the things you want to keep in mind is when you think about some questions to ask at the end, a really interesting question is, where might we take this MQ client on-prem? Will we take it and support our BizTalk adapters? Will we take and support our WCF channel? Will we take and make it available for just .NET programming with maybe a different programming model besides WCF? That's a great question to ask us. We've also developed a common DB2 and Informix connector. And I say common because, as it turns out, DB2, Informix, IMSDB, a number of other databases, including Oracle, Sybase, and SQL Server through some technology that we own, can all support the industry standard DRDA, the Distributed Relational Database Architecture. Wow, 4-letter acronym. Has a 5-letter acronym as well. But so we developed a DB2 connector because we think that's the next most popular connector based upon our experience with BizTalk, with SQL Server, with .NET, and Office. But we also were able to bring along, using the same code base, just a little tweaking and then some testing, an Informix connector. Now, as a disclaimer, the MQ connector and client, the connector we started working on, I think, in February, the client in October, so it's a very early technology. The DB2 underlying DRDA, it's a fully managed code again for the client. We started that about 1.5 years ago, so the underlying client's in great shape. In fact, we have a new ADONet provider that we run over the top of that. But the connectors we started in October, so they're also still fairly new. And so we're going to demonstrate in fair detail the MQ, DB2, and I'm just going to cover Informix lightly. It's not quite ready for a lot of interesting demos. But the point of getting these out early is the way that we run things at Microsoft. Satya Nadella, I think, made a point of this in his keynote, and that is that we want to get the technology out early for you. We'll market preview. We want to get feedback. You know, it's all I can do. So we're IT pros, right? Mostly, maybe some architects. Dev. Okay, well, hey, with all due respect, the engineers that I manage, they're like racehorses. They're thoroughbreds. They want to go out there and code as many features as they can. And it's all I can do to rein them back in until we get that customer feedback. The old Microsoft is we know what our customers want. We have a new platform, new technology. We'll just architect it, design it, implement it, test it, and throw it out there. That's the old. The new is we want to work with you during the design phase we're in right now, and the development phase, which we're obviously just starting for the most part. So with that, let's get into the technology. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Valerie, who will talk about the MQ connector and then give you some really cool demos. Val?
Hey, thank you, Paul. Good morning. So I am the program manager for the MQ connector. As it shows here on the slide, it is built on top of our own Microsoft MQ client that's fully managed code. Right now, it does not do transactional. The plan is that we are looking at it right now for doing XA transactions with it. And as Paul mentioned, there's a huge possibility for the future on this MQ client once we take a look at it and talk with customers to see if they're going to want to use this even in an on-prem situation. We may want to build it into our BizTalk adapters so that we no longer have the reliance on the IBM MQ client. So we go TCP/IP over to any WebSphere MQ server. Right now, we are testing and developing against WebSphere 8. So we have not tested it yet against 7. Again, we're looking into what sort of customer requests we're going to be having on this. I've had a lot of interest in that.
Yeah, we previewed this technology a couple weeks ago in London at a BizTalk conference, and the number one feedback was, hey, can you support 7.5, 7.2 with this technology as well? And we're taking that to heart. We're actually starting that work. So hopefully it'll be something we can do very cost effectively and efficiently without destabilizing where we're making progress right now.
Right. And this is working not just to the mainframe, but to wherever IBM WebSphere will run. So on iSeries, on Linux, Windows. What I will have today for my demo is using WebSphere in Azure. So that, because otherwise the other piece to this is that back-end connectivity of being able to get from Azure in through some sort of a hybrid connection or VPN to your actual WebSphere server.
And I'll talk about those options after we go through the 3 connectors, and we can discuss those.
Okay, so what we do with this API app is it allows for the RESTful type of calls. So I'll show you some C# code here in the demo of how to read and write messages to the queue. And then the idea is that it will be fully documented through our Swagger, and we're working on getting that into good shape so that people can start using it right off of Azure Marketplace.
So how many people are familiar with Swagger? It's a way to get information back from API apps, RESTful web services, get the JSON payload. I'll give a pretty good demonstrative how where we're going with this in terms of the DB2 and Informix ones. The ability for you to configure the connectors and then get back inline examples that you can just run and test. It's a great way to get your developers up to speed on technology. It's also a nice way to ad hoc test something when you're in pre-deployment or post-deployment.
Okay, so we'll start out in Azure, and I've got one of the connectors already set up, but I'm going to start from scratch here, and now we'll go into the marketplace, and we can do a search on MQ, and
so you're not going to find you found an MQ?
Yeah.
Okay, we fixed that. I was going to say that the 2-letter search term I've been asking for.
Yeah.
And I'll talk a little bit about how you package these things up as well. So be sure if I don't get to it, ask me, because you can develop your own custom connectors as well, and we can help you with that.
So IBM does offer a virtual machine with their MQ8 that's available, but we're going to choose the MQ connector here, and we start out with a short bit of description of the connector, and I'm going to go in and create this.
Again, the idea is to provide as much information as possible in line with the technology, so you have to go out to MSDN. You won't find much about the connectors on MSDN right now. We're still working on that content, but you will find more information in the online HTML here, and once you load up the service, and of course also with the Swagger, than you will for most other API apps. That's where we're focusing, is inline docs right now.
So when you create one of these API apps, then there's an area here called package settings. And that's where our various parameters are that are specific for the MQ connector. So I've got my MQ server set up. And so this is the host and the port. You separate them with the colon. The user is whoever you have set up in the MQM group when you're working with a Windows version. And I'm going to set browse to true, which means that by default, we're not going to delete the messages when we read them off of the queue. And then we have the option for a timeout. We'll give us a second on that. And on the MQ connector, we do offer a demo mode so that you don't have to have a live host in the background. This gives you the chance of actually writing some messages. The messages just go internally in memory. They're not persisted. If the service is restarted, those messages go away. So this is not meant for any sort of production capability, but it does give a developer a chance to play with it and write a few messages, read those messages back. So I'm going to create that. And now once I hit the button, it takes a second, and now it's working on creating that MQ connector. And this will take 45 seconds to a minute to do. So I'm going to go to my app here and show you a little bit about the app that I've written. And I took a lot of this off of MSDN I found for the REST calls. So what we need to do on this is run it as async, and it came in. We come in here and have the HTTP client. Our URL here I have set up above as the URL to the connector. Now, until this connector gets created, I won't have the correct URL. So once we've got the new connector made, I'll cut and paste our new URL into here. That URL is generated when the connector is deployed. Then I have my various URL parameters. And what I've got this set up for is to read, you can read it per message ID. That's an ID that comes back from the WebSphere MQ server, or just read everything. And if you have a message ID, you put it in here. If you don't, then you just hit enter, and it'll read all the messages on the queue. And then we can override that browse. So even though I've got it set for browse equal true, if I want to delete everything, then I can set my browse equals to false when I make my call. And so the actual call here is done with the client and get async call. And then we see if our response is successful. And then if it is, we go in and enumerate the JSON. This is all working with the JSON data that goes to the host and comes back from the host. So I get the JSON back.
Of course, you mean Azure, but I do the same thing. I refer to Azure as a host sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
our deployment succeeded on our demo. So we'll go in here to the demo. And the first thing that I need to do is, by default, it's set up as an access level of internal.
So we not only want to remind our IT pros in the audience what to do, prescriptive guidance, we also want to remind them what not to do. This is something you don't do.
For the demo,
open it up for everyone.
Right. For the demo, I'm setting this up as public and anonymous.
And I'm going to do the same thing.
Right.
Which means you can go out there and use these
Right, except that you'd have to know that whole long
Yeah, the GUID?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So,
I don't rename that.
right. So once I've got that saved, now I can head out. It gives me my URL right there to go to, and it brings up my information. And this is where we have the documentation for the connector that talks about, we've got the API settings, the queue manager channel. Those were the items that I was filling in earlier, the host. And down here, we have the web API operations. So this will take me right into Swagger if I click on these. So I can go in to get message here, and it brings up Swagger for me. And I can try it out. Let's see what messages we have on the queue right now. So there's one message out on the queue, test MQ message, and here is the message ID. Now, with IBM WebSphere, the message ID actually has binary in it. It's got some null values. So we had to, it's not valid JSON data. So this is a base 64 encoded version of the message ID. So those of you familiar with MQ and their message IDs, that's why it looks really funny.
So you haven't actually connected to the server yet? So
Yeah. Connected to which
the
server?
MQ server.
The MQ server. We connected to the MQ server here just to get this message back.
Right. But before that, you didn't. Sorry, you didn't get to the. You're not actually connecting the server until you do an operation.
Right.
So that's I think
Right.
is a nice clean implementation of this API app connector. When we get to the database ones, it's a little bit different. I'm definitely looking for some feedback on that. But I'll explain why. I'll also explain why.
Because this is one call, it heads out to the back-end server, brings it back, and now we're done.
The point is that you don't need anything from the MQ server at this point. You don't need metadata. You're not going to validate the configuration unless you're asking the app to do that.
Right. And so within Swagger here, I don't have to have any code, and I'm able to post a message. So if I want to, I'll copy this. It does need, it's very specific of the type of message information it needs. We have two different ways of putting data into it. One is with just the keyword data. And so I'm putting in data that says message for MQ, and I'll try that one out. And if I wanted to, I could put more than one message in here. I just have to put square brackets around it for the JSON. So I just put in message for MQ. The response that it comes back right now, we're responding with the entire message. So that's going to be too chatty for a production environment. It doesn't make sense to do that. But for our preview, we wanted to have that verification back. And so that is in there right now. And again, I'd love to get some feedback on that, if that's something that people would like to have optionally, that you do get the response back with the actual message in it, or like the first 10 characters of it, or just nothing. So now if I come back up here to get my messages and try this out, now I've got two different messages that are up there because my browse was equal to true, so it didn't delete that first message. So if we look, the other item that we can do here is data, or we can put in encoded data. And so I went out and I encoded, here is another message, and this is what it looks like when it's base 64 encoded. So we're going to copy that in here. And so that went in as encoded data. Now, when the MQ connector receives that encoded data, it says to itself, oh, okay, they're sending me some base 64 encoded data. I am going to unencode that before I send it up to MQ. So when I go in here to get my information back, it's come back as my encoded data again. And but up in the WebSphere MQ in the queue, it should show as what the encoded data was. This allows you to put binary up, and if another application is accessing those messages, that you would be able to get that binary out and not have to be encoding and unencoding it within your applications. So if we take a look at the sample app here, I'll say that I want to read out of this queue, and I'm going to just read all of my messages. I'm not going to delete them after reading. And in my program, I have my the first two messages are just data. The last message was encoded data, and then I decode it within my program to show what it said. And I've got my message IDs here as well, so I can also get by message ID. And just get the one single message if I know an ID of a message. Again, that message ID does have to be base64 encoded. So, this code will also write messages, and it's using basically the similar calls in order to write the messages. And let's see here, it post as JSON. And once it's all set up, so it can write either an encoded message or the data message.
What are some of our other ideas around helping our customers with encoding and decoding? Maybe something more interesting than just a string.
Right. We're looking at it would be a second connector. So a connector where we could put in, it would be similar to what we have with Host Integration Server with a pipeline
For BizTalk?
For BizTalk, right. And that it would say, okay, you take the first 3 bytes and those are binary data, and the next 5 bytes are an ASCII string or an EBCDIC string, whichever. The next several bytes might be packed decimal data from the mainframe. And you would define what the bytes are, and that microservice would take care of doing that. Then the actual MQ connector could send information to that, get the information back, and then send it along its way.
So this BizTalk pipeline component we added a couple of releases ago that allows BizTalk applications to do very rich data conversion.
Right.
And it's based upon an external metadata library that you generate with our Host Integration Server Designer. Here's a secret, if you don't already know this. This comes from it's not secret, I'll say something first. This comes from a technology we call Transaction Integrator, it used to be called COM Transaction Integrator. Valerie is one of the world experts on TI. And so if you use that today to access CICS or IMS or AS400 applications, it's very capable. It can also be a bit daunting to get your hands on first. There's a lot of capabilities in there, though, and Valerie's one of the premier experts on that technology. That sounds like a great idea to offer rich data conversion for the cloud.
Right.
You could use it with FTP and many other things.
That's right. It could be used with lots of things, and then it would be the step into creating a connector that would be a TI connector to be able to call programs up in CICS or IMS.
I always talk about customer contact. It's when we started in the company, it was all based upon that. And you hire into this team, you have to understand that it's not necessarily the most really cool thing that Microsoft might be doing, connecting to an IBM mainframe. We think it is. We think it's really exciting and challenging. And so we tend to do a lot of our own outreach and marketing and support. We help the support team. And so I bring that up just because it's part of our DNA, not because we're trying to get points for talking to customers. You have questions, send us an email. Happy to talk to you on the phone. Love to work through partners as well, though.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to show here is changing the settings, because you can change the settings on the fly here within these API apps. So if I go into my MQ Ignite demo here, and I go into all settings, application settings, and scroll down. Here I have my settings for my queue manager. I could change those names here if I wanted to. I could change this so that instead of going to a real host, I could change it to true, and it'll use my demo host, which would be very useful if you don't have the real host set up. You just set it to demo, and then when you're ready, when you have your real host, you set it to false, and then it will start trying to hit the real host. So once you make these changes and you hit save, it's changed, and then you're in using the new settings.
Cool, really cool.
So that's all I have.
Outstanding.
Yes.
Okay. So I know you probably have some questions. For efficiency, I think we'll hold those to the end. And so, again, we think the focus on MQ is warranted. It's one of the most popular non-Microsoft connectors that we offer. We used to have a bridge from MSMQ to MQ, very popular. Supporting MQ and BizTalk has been one of the most popular BizTalk adapters, and then the WCF channel is well received as well. And that's even in the case where IBM has their own WCF channel for MQ. Sometimes customers like our technology on Windows and IBM on the foreign system, and that's kind of the model that we're going down with MQ. It's also good to know that IBM is thrilled with our work on the client for Windows. Helps alleviate some of their stress in developing a Windows technology. So looking at the next connector we think is going to be well received, and that's the DB2 connector. On the left side, we have the Azure Data Center. On the right side, the on-premises data center. It can get a little more complicated. For example, when I'm demonstrating it, I'm going to both connect to on-prem, DB2 for ZOS, V11, and also I'm going to have a connector that is defined to connect to DB2 for Windows 10.5 running in an Azure VM. And I believe also my Informix is going to be running in a VM today. I know it is. I set it up. All right, so excuse me, on the left side of the diagram, there's just a simple architecture here, and that's to get the point across. We don't have a lot of layers. We don't have a lot of separate components. So we have the connector code. It's fairly thin, and it is an ADO.NET consumer application built as a very rich, RESTful web service, JSON compatible. So unlike some of the adapters we're developing, or connectors we're developing that replace the BizTalk adapters or connect into the WCF channels based adapters or WCF service-based adapters on Windows, we've decided to not have the connectors require an on-prem footprint. We have the connectors that can run exclusively in Azure. It's simpler to deploy, simpler to support. I will talk about a hybrid scenario where it runs in both places and explain why that's valuable. And then there's other things we're working on to provide for connectivity across platform. I mentioned here that the next one is ADO.NET. This is a new Microsoft ADO.NET provider for DRDA, so it's common with DB2 and Informix. You know, maybe we'll extend it to IMSDB, probably not, but in any case, it is extensible. And then underneath that is this new Microsoft managed client for DRDA. So it's all managed code. So no 30% interop kerthunk, which is really nice. When it runs on-prem, the ADO.NET provider and the DIRDA client support XA two-phase commit transactions. In the cloud, they don't. At some point, they could, because there is technology coming out that allows to have a stateful engine to do things like durable two-phase commit with logging and resynchronization. But for now, first cut of this, and be sure and ask us what our schedule looks like. It's going to be it's going to be remote unit work, so no two-phase commit. And this all runs in the context of app service and the API management gateway. So connecting on-prem, whether this is running as a DB2 connector, whether the .NET provider and client are running on-prem, we're supporting TCP/IP in the first release. We're not supporting SNA 6.2. It is possible. We're just simply not going that way initially. We're supporting industry standard DRDA. So it's something that we sit with Oracle, Sun, Microsoft, IBM. We all sit together with a number of ISVs. We get together once in a while, and we develop the DRDA standard. We get the specs drafted. Sometimes we draft some. Most of them come from IBM. We review the specs. We implement it. If I need to, and I do from time to time, I pick up the phone. I call the IBM engineers in San Jose, and they answer the phone. They help us with problems. Of course, we have a support contract as well for MQ and KICS and everything, and we're able to open up cases and reproduce problems that help you, our customers, get more efficient fixes. I think IBM really likes the relationship. We're very much a partner, part of the developer program, and it works well. It's very efficient. So TCP/IP. Most of our customers are telling us that they'll be using VPNs, if not ExpressRoute, over that. So you have a nice, tightly coupled, reliable, secure pipe between the cloud and your data center. We have a couple of things you can do that if you're evaluating the technology or if you decide not to put in a VPN. One is a hybrid solution where we can tunnel TCP/IP traffic from Azure Data Center to a Windows computer. We often talk about using that with SQL Server. That will work if you're running MQ, DB2, and Informix on a Windows server. But the stub is Windows and it stops there. It doesn't reroute it to another TCP/IP address. In the building we work in, which is the Azure App Service platform, Azure Web Services, we developed that hybrid connector. And so, of course, I'm interested in talking to the team that owns that, it's part of our org, and finding out if it's possible to tweak that and have it do a redirect. It's basically doing a localhost connection. Why not carry on? In the absence of that, our BizTalk team is developing a service bus proxy relay that will allow you to have the connector running in the cloud, but also automatically push or pull a version of the connector down on-prem or run in IIS. And so it's running in both places. It operates as a proxy stub in the cloud, directs all the calls via service bus, TCP/IP to the actual connector, fully loaded, all the code executing on-prem. And I'll demonstrate that as well. That allows us to get to anything. Okay, we have it implemented in DB2 and Informix. We'll be looking at implementing that for MQ, but that allows you to get to any platform that MQ, DB2, and Informix are running on. Okay, so again, just an alternative if you're not putting in a VPN. On the right side, it's the IBM system, and of course we get to IBM DB2 server running on the most popular platforms. Missing from this is VSE and VM. I don't currently have those in my environment, don't support those, but let me know if that's required. And then of course we get to any of the artifacts, tables, views, schema, store procedures. Right now, store procedure support is limited in the connector, so we haven't finished testing that. But there is a way to do any kind of SQL call. We call them custom statements. I'll show you that. So what did I miss? The connectors are web APIs. They support the common operations, select, insert, update, delete, and custom SQL statements. One of the cool custom SQL statements you can do is something you can do with our BizTalk adapter for DB2. And that's on the receive port in BizTalk. You can do a select with an optional update or delete using a server cursor, so static SQL. Very nice. You can do that as well with custom SQL statement. I was working on that yesterday for the demo, had a little trouble with it, so I won't show that today, but it is a cool capability. You can also basically do any custom SQL statement, a select, insert, update, delete that's very rich, a call statement, and that works very well. And we're looking to see if we need to do DDL statements as well. DML statements. Just let us know what type of statements you want to execute. The reason we kind of need to know what class of statements for custom is that we do a lot of fetching of schema when we connect and in order to do runtime data conversion. So, of course, we're using industry standard OData as well, and that's so we can support things like machine learning solutions, big data. So Power Pivot, Power View, you've seen those demonstrated in some of the keynote sessions. Very, very cool technology. They consume industry standard open data protocol. And so we also have OData. Our select, insert, update, delete, insert, update, delete statements support batching. We can do very high-speed bulk inserts. It's part of the DRDA protocol. It's extremely well implemented by IBM on the back-end systems. And it gives you anywhere from 5x to 20x improvement in performance in inserting data. So coming out of Azure, coming out of Windows, going into the mainframe, for example. We also batch update and delete statements for you automatically, making it a little easier. Valerie mentioned the square bracket JSON arrays, and so we support that. With OData, we support primarily single operations, but there's a potential of supporting batching as well. We're compatible with logic apps using these single database operations, select, single insert, single update, single delete. We're working with logic app, also part of our org, to see if they can support batching at some point as well, so it'll be more efficient. But it's really cool. We support logic apps with DB2 in terms of actions that I mentioned, And then we're working on triggers. So again, we can have that capability that you're familiar with from the BizTalk environment. Swagger documentation examples are based on a configured table list. And the reason for that is it gives you an extra layer of security, so you can limit, as IT Pro developers, what objects your end users can access. It also allows us to pre-fetch the schema. When we load up the data service, we connect to the database, validate the connection, validate the schema, and fetch the metadata back. There is an option to save the metadata. It's currently not supported, but we'll get that finished for you. And that'll allow you to cache that metadata locally and not have to fetch it every time when we connect. I mentioned networking, TCP/IP access, the VPN hybrid connections on-prem. I'm going to show the proxy relay. And then the DB2 servers. So we're an IBM customer as well, and we support the IBM platforms and software fairly well, the same as you do. New system comes out within about a year, we upgrade. We tend to keep 1 or 2 back levels out there. If we need something, we have an arrangement where we can fire something up if it's a little bit out of life cycle. It's not too much of a problem for us. But this is basically the target DB2 servers we're going to support. Okay, with that, we're going to switch over, and I'll give you a quick demo.
You lost your VPN connection.
I lost my VPN connection.
Oh, yeah. It went to
Yes,
sleep.
classic. Let's see if it comes back. We want to connect to the mainframe, right?
Yeah,
We want to see it.
that's right.
Ah. I lost my network connection.
Oh.
Even better. That is something that might not come back too easily. We lost all wireless here at Microsoft.
I've got it here.
Just toggle it on and off. Who would have thought that? Tell you what, when in doubt, restart. That'll take a second. Do you still have wireless as well?
Yeah,
You connected?
I'm connected, so what I think we can do, oh, domain. Okay, let's ping sys1.
It's always been the case for us that you need network connectivity.
Yeah.
Now, there was a time when we touted around with this little P1, P2 AS400s. There were little modular systems. And then one time we actually had a mainframe on site. Very expensive to move that.
Would you like to use mine?
Yeah, let's get this thing up here.
Okay.
I have everything working over here. Can you bring up a VPN connection back to corporate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we now have internet access. Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks, Val. I still might need it. You never know.
I'm ready.
What can go wrong will go wrong. Okay, great. A little cheat sheet of connectivity information. Yes, I use Google Chrome. Can't believe I do this. But it provides me a little bit of better interaction with some of the JSON payloads. Probably can wean myself off of it. Valerie doesn't seem to need it, so I probably don't either. Right, so in the Azure Marketplace, Valerie showed you a great way to find the MQ. When it comes to publishing components to Azure, if you're developing custom applications, there's 2 packages that you produce. One is a NuGet package that has your actual binary code in it, so your API app in our case. And the second one is an Azure Gallery package that has metadata for the marketplace. And there's a nice way to develop both of these, pretty good documentation. There's an ability to test the Azure Marketplace or the Gallery item locally. And I've been working on those for a couple months now, and we couldn't get a 2-character search term. I'm glad that we have that now. Been putting it in there, it's not working, asking the team about that. Another way to find these is to put in IBM, and you'll find not only IBM MQ and DB2 that you can run in the cloud, that's one way to use these technologies, but also our 3 connectors right here. Okay? And then for the DIRDA compatible ones, they show up here as well. So if I choose the MQ one, again, try to provide a pretty good explanation of what these capabilities are. Here's support for logic apps. Documentation will just take you to a base location in MSDN. We're responsible for the docs, Val and I. We haven't gotten around to it yet. Let's do this. Give that a name. Choose my plan. So it basically takes 2 settings, a connection string and also a table list. The connection string is the common connection string you're familiar with from our ODBC, OLADB providers, ADO.NET, the entity provider for DB2, the BizTalk adapters. We have a little GUI wizard that runs in Visual Studio that helps you create that. That requires, of course, the on-prem code or SQL servers add-on for DB2. I've already created a connection. This particular connection is going to be local to a VHD in my same region. And then the table list. This is just to allow us to prefetch the schema. Now, it is a required element. If you omit an object, you won't be able to interoperate with it. So you have to provide the table list ahead of time. We don't think that's a problem because in our experience, you don't add tables, remove tables that often, but let us know. You can update the configuration and restart the web service so it's dynamic. And then here, if I were connecting via the service proxy relay, which I am doing in one of my connectors, I would enter in true on-prem and then a service bus connection string. We'll initiate that. This will actually take a little bit of time to, I didn't type in well, create that. It will take a little while to actually create this service. Meanwhile, I have one that's already configured, and we can run a couple of quick demos with it. I'm going to use a technology called Postman that allows you to interact with the web service through different capabilities, through XML, through JSON, through straight web APIs, and then you can actually save your work, which is really nice, and use it later. Makes it easy for me. One of the APIs we have is a API test connection. I mentioned that the connectors support web APIs and OData. And so on your URL, you will tell the web service whether you're going to do API calls, which come in 2 types, administration, like testing the connection, validating the schema, saving the metadata, or OData calls for industry standard OData access. You know, we'll definitely take feedback on this. We've changed these things off and on. Here's a case where I'm doing a test connection and get back an interesting result. Not what I expected. Let me do a validate. I'm also getting an interesting result back. Not what I expected. Which makes me think that it's not up and running. 7302. Interesting. Security access. This one is doing a local connection, so that is unfortunate. Let me switch to the more interesting and cool demo, and we'll come back and check the one I just created, and we'll use it from Swagger. So in my VPN connection, I have a connection to an on-prem server. It's a Windows Server 2012 box, and here I've got our new emulator. It's a TN3070 emulator, part of Host Integration Server 2013. And of course, I've been logged out in the last couple minutes. Log back in. There we go. It wouldn't be one of our sessions without the mainframe, right, guys? Woohoo! Right, so I like QMF. has some color. No, it's a nice ad hoc query tool. You can use, Spoofy, QMF, write a little COBOL program. All that stuff's fun. You can, hang on, F6. I'm always doing the wrong key on this keyboard. There we go. Our product includes its own version of Northwind that works with DB2 on different platforms, so I like to use that. You can, use the built-in samples as well. And if I execute this query, it's just a simple list of zip codes. I have the standard Northwind table list that ends with Seattle. And if I go back to my web service here, I'm going to insert a single row. This is using the API insert capability. It's a single row. There's 3 columns in it. It's basically char int. Execute that. Hopefully I'll have some success here. If I go back to the server and I start a network trace, you'll see the traffic coming by. So here we are. I actually started a little bit late, but here's the response back from that call. Mm-hmm. So what's happening here is I've configured my microservice or API connector to use that service bus proxy relay. And so there's a stub version of it running in the cloud, and the full version of it has been deployed down onto my Windows server running inside IIS. And all of my config settings are replicated down to that microservice on a frequent basis. There's changes. And on-prem, I'm able to connect to anything. In this case, I can connect to IBM DB2 for ZOS. And let's go ahead and run that query again. Oops. I'm reusing my Surface Pro 3 on my personal computer because I like it. Usually I dock it, the keyboard. I don't use that often, but here's that new row I just inserted. So that's coming from the cloud, down through Service Bus, through IIS, and into the mainframe. And the point of this is that you can get your hands on this technology right away, like you would normally. You effectively run everything outbound from a port in Windows. You go out to Azure with a connection manager. It connects to the service bus with the credentials you provide. It pulls the microservice down, installs it into IIS, and then it keeps that pipe open so you can have traffic flowing from Azure into your Windows computer in a secure way. Mm-hmm. And let's go ahead and do a couple more things here. So I mentioned bulk. Here's the ability to denote an array in JSON. And because it's an insert statement, it's using the multi-row input or multi-protocol, multi-dimensional multi-row input into the mainframe, and it's lightning fast. This is a small insert, but you can see that went even quicker than the single row insert. So you can use this bulk insert option even for single rows, and you're going to get, again, that 5x, 10x improvement in performance just because of the way it's implemented by us in the client protocol, and most importantly, how it's implemented by IBM on the back-end system. And let's go ahead and look for those new rows. And here are those new rows at the end. Mm-hmm. Cool. And then lastly, we want to go in here and delete some of these rows. And the bulk delete. Bulk delete is not using anything fancy in the protocol. We're just simply batching that together for you to make it a little bit easier to program against the microservice. Of course, it is faster, but not that 5x, et cetera, improvement in performance. And then we should end with Seattle in here, same query. Good. So we can insert, delete. We can also do things like updates, which is my other microservice, which wasn't working for me. And let's try this again. 73020. Yeah, that's too bad. Let's see if that microservice I created is up and running. Looks like it isn't. Well, it wouldn't be a Paul demo if something didn't work. I never have 100% my demos. Is that because of my attitude? I don't know. Known to be a positive guy, but I'm having a little trouble here. Right, so one other thing I wanted to show you, and that is, let me search my objects here. I have also created a Logic app. I just wanted to point out that that support is in here with our connectors. And it's really easy to use. If you have a chance to go to one of the sessions on Logic apps, the program manager for that technology he gives really cool demos. It's really fun stuff. And let's see if I can see the results. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm even having trouble with my connectors in the cloud. This is great.
Okay.
Woohoo! But suffice to say that you can pull from the gallery the DB2 connector and one that's already configured. It does work with Logic apps. Not if you're me today, it doesn't, but generally. And it's a really cool way to stitch together different operations. Currently I'm supporting the insert, update, delete operations single row at a time. Interesting. I'll go back to slides.
Okay.
I think that means something.
There you go.
No more demos.
No more demos.
Pretty quickly, in Formex, based upon the same underlying .NET data provider and same underlying .NET client for DRDA. So same story for the most part. A little bit different in terms of the data type support, of course. How we fetch schema is a little bit different. How we get errors back slightly different. So you might see more rich errors reported with a DB2 connector versus the Informix connector if you're a partner and using both. Same operations. I forgot to mention that we also support a merge operation. That's a relatively newer command in the DB2 command set, and that'll do like an up insert, which is really nice. So we support that as well. It does work. Let's see if I can show you that. The configuration is exactly the same. This one I've already configured. If we go to the documentation, we'll bring up the Swagger. And I have just a couple of tables defined, but we'll show you the OData operations and how you use those. We'll also show you the API app operations and how to use those. So we've really kind of gone out of our way to make the Swagger very rich for the DB2 and Informix providers. Do a simple select. We support some of the filters, so you can do where clauses, top, sorts, that sort of thing. And there's a nice simple call. So Informix connector does work. It's a little bit less mature than the DB2 connector, but if you have Informix, let us know. If we need to accelerate fixes for you, we'd be happy to do that. So connectivity, I mentioned the hybrid. That's if you're connecting from Azure to a Windows server. We'll look and see if we can make that more extensible. In the meantime, our connectors support the Service Bus Relay. If you're having problems using that, you may need some additional code to run on the PC. We can help you with that. And that allows you to have the microservice running on-prem and just a stub running in the cloud. And then virtual networking. We really think that you're going to run VPNs and use ExpressRoute actually over a VPN. But let us know. So, of course, what we do is not just cloud. We also have our on-prem technology. It's licensed primarily through BizTalk, but also subset through SQL Server. And our host integration server 2013 release was just almost 2 years ago now. We are working on a new release, and we'll talk about it here in our roadmap. But we have certified HIS running in the cloud. We even run our high-performance routing over Internet protocols. Our SNA connectivity runs in the cloud, connecting to on-prem. So the full set of technologies runs in the cloud. Works really well. Spent a lot of time making sure that it works and it performs well. Had to do some tuning with Hyper-V some time ago. That was carried on to the Azure VM, so the connectivity for HPR is well tuned now. A little bit of work with Microsoft and IBM engineers on that. And so one of the things you can do is you can use infrastructure as a service in Azure and deploy your host integration server computers in the Azure data centers. Makes sense for a lot of our large multinationals, even routing client connections through a gateway in the cloud into your on-prem data centers. We think of the HIS products having 3 technology areas: our infrastructure technology, that's our SNA gateway, our APIs, our clients, so that we can emulate the devices, application types, logical unit types, physical units that you're all familiar with from the IBM systems. Also our data connectors, which I demonstrated. We have BizTalk adapters, ODBC for DB2, we have ADIO.NET for DB2, and in our next release, currently in pre-release testing in production at one customer, almost for a year now, is a new BizTalk adapter for Informix and a new ADIO.NET provider for Informix. I'm getting email from people while I'm here at the conference. They saw this listed, and I can help you enter the pre-release program. You don't have to do marketing. We have to have you in there for evaluation even, if not test to rapid deployment. And then messaging and programs, the area that Valerie is the expert in. So transaction integrator and our support for MQ, whether it's in BizTalk or .NET, very rich capabilities there. So our roadmap, we're working on these connectors. The idea is to get them out just as quickly as possible, and we have. Don't think the problems I have were related to our code. I think they were network timing related. The 403 is interesting because everything was configured and working before the session, during the session, so I'm not sure. I think it's more timing related. A lot of demos going on right now. There are outages now and then in some of the regions that we're using because they're not designed for the type of production workloads. We're in special regions, and maybe not enough cycles there. But we have the DB2 connector, Informix, and MQ. They're out there. They're usable. If you have any issues, contact us. Send us email. I'm Paul Larson with an E. It's Danish, not Swedish. Paul Larson with an O is a researcher. If you ask him about database stuff, he does that. He might answer your question, but he should route it to me. So if you call on the phone, you might not get the right Paul. There's a couple other Paul similar Larsons as well. Best to send email. It's plarson@microsoft.com. And then plan for the future. We have some improvements for the TI connector. Some of the really cool things we're doing for TI is to help you do upgrades from one release to another, to do deployments using PowerShell and other technologies, make it much easier for IT pros to upgrade and deploy and maintain installations of Transaction Integrator. Recently, I spent some time on-site at a customer. Very interesting to see recently how the operations rooms are with the big monitors and the green, yellow, red, and how you need to be able to deploy sometimes fresh servers to fix runtime problems, and PowerShell is something that we're spending a lot of time and money on. We also have something called a TI, Host-Initiated Processing, or TI service. It allows for host-initiated workloads. So everything we showed today is from the concept of Azure or Windows being the client to the mainframe. But we do have 2 technologies that allow outbound from the mainframe onto a Windows server and outbound from the mainframe into the cloud, whether you're running in a VHD. We've also prototyped samples where there's cloud services for Transaction Integrator and DRDA. That allows mainframe CICS and IMS, or AS400 programs, or DB2 to call outbound, out the ports like you would with just about anything without a whole lot of trouble with the firewall, which you still need permission, into the cloud. And so what we talked about in terms of the hybrid connection, the service bus proxy relay connection, the VPNs, with this host-initiated processing, you could get out as well today and do things very interesting. So we're looking at how we should implement with TI and DRDA web services, and that's actually something we'd love to have some dialogues on. Do we implement them as microservices? Do they run inside app services? They should just be something else in the gallery that you run. They stand as endpoints in the web. I think certainly we want to leverage what we can do with app services in terms of deployment and maintaining, but they probably are very much standalone. So you can set up inbound connections and go right in. We talked about whether we should be plumbing to the service bus and doing connectors for that, whether on-prem or in the cloud. And then, of course, we talked about where do we take the MQ client? Do we put it underneath the BizTalk adapters, WCF channel? We probably would implement a net new BizTalk adapter for MQ to run over this, just like we did with DB2 and Informix. We took the new client, we put new ADO.NET on top of it, because we didn't want to disrupt the current code base. It's all compatible, works for years, that sort of thing. So on-prem, we're working on HSV10. It's a Host Integration Server 2016 release. And it's going to ship with the next BizTalk 2016, which will follow SQL Server 2016 or SQL 16 by about a month or two. BizTalk needs to tune with the databases for the message boxes, and we ship with BizTalk. We'll also put, as is our tradition, the data connector, in this case connectors, in with SQL Server. So the web release feature pack for SQL Server will include not only DB2 but also Informix. We're also working with the Office team and the machine learning Power BI team. They want to consume DB2 Informix from Power View, from Power Query. They want to consume it both on-prem and in the cloud. Well, with the API apps, they can do that in the cloud, but on-prem, we're looking at packaging up our DB2 and Informix connectors as well. Ideally, it's going to be the new code base. So it's fully managed code to be much faster. Both of those consumers, well, one's managed and one's unmanaged, but managed code's the way to go for us. As I mentioned before, HSV10 is actually in production, limited capabilities. We are working on the beta release, and if you have an interest in looking at it sooner, just let Val and I know, and we can carve out some technology of different packaging options to make it available for you to evaluate. Some other sessions to look at, I mentioned the logic apps. Stephen does a really cool demonstration of logic apps. This stuff will work. I didn't have much luck today. And then let's have a discussion. We've reserved some time here. 10 minutes, not bad, 5 minutes over. Please come up to the microphone if you will. It makes it a little bit easier than paraphrasing your questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John. More of a comment than a question. You mentioned earlier about releasing a on-prem for .NET integration. I work in a shop where we have mixed mainframe workload, all DB2, CI/CS services, as well as primarily .NET. And we would be very interested in connectors for .NET apps. In addition to Azure, we don't have Azure workload, but we do have a lot of on-prem bits that would take advantage of having a connector. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that on-prem story a little bit.
No, of course. So although we have base .NET capability in what we call Transaction Integrator, we have the WCF channel for MQ, and we have the three ADO.NET providers for DB2, Informix, and DRDA. We are definitely interested in exploring how we package, maybe we just include in the HIS package, the API app connectors. To me, it's just what license do you refer to? Right now, they're NuGet packages, so the right thing to do is to put them in the NuGet gallery and have a click-through license that refers to, it's just a paper license and a URL, that says if you're using it on, in fact, if you look at the beta, it talks about that. If you're using it on-prem, it's part of the Windows Server license. If you're using it in the cloud, it's part of the Azure license. So we love that feedback because it's all about, as engineers, we want to use our technology, right? As much as possible. Thank you. Thanks, John. Good to meet you.
Good morning. Sorry. I have two questions, if I may. The first one's regarding the app connectors, the MQ and the DB2. I know you've been presenting this as Azure, which is the public cloud. Microsoft made announcements yesterday or earlier that there's going to be the Azure Stack. I think it's going to be available on premises. Will those type of connectors be available for the private cloud?
Yes, and thank you very much. I forgot to mention that. What we used to know is the Windows Azure Pack or Windows Pack for Azure is now the Azure Stack. It's easier to say. I like that. And we're absolutely committed in the app service team and the Azure team, app plat team, to deliver all the technologies related to app service, including the API app connectors for DB2, Informix, MQ, and the additional ones we're developing for use in the stack. Absolutely. We actually use that ourselves today outside of the app service. So we use these connectors, we deploy them to Azure on-prem using the Windows Server Pack for Azure. Darn, I can't remember what it used to be called now. I like the new name so much, it's so short. And we can't wait for the internal availability and, of course, public availability of Azure Stack because it makes our testing more efficient. Some of the performance problems were related to the connectivity, but frankly, we haven't done much tuning of those, like the Service Bus Proxy Relay and the hybrid. They're very new technologies, but Some of it's just related to the type of Azure subsystems that we're utilizing as dev test. So when we run it on-prem, it's the kind of sub-second response time we're familiar with. So for our own development and testing, we use VHDs. We use Azure Stack today, and we're just waiting for App Service to be available. We're fully committed to delivering everything we talk about in terms of App Service working on-prem as well as part of Azure Stack.
That's great. Thank you. Sorry, my second question, if I may, is regarding the actual DB2. The organization I work for is very sensitive to MIP utilization. Okay, we're always looking for ways to reduce MIPS. Do you know if any of the actual code that will get executed via the DB2 connector will be zip eligible?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Because we are using DRDA, it will utilize a zip processor, and I believe in version 10.11 you're getting an additional 30-40% offload with DRDA. It's incredible. The one thing we don't do that could really help you out, though, in terms of offloading mainframe MIPS when accessing DB2 with our DRDA client, and you can get this with the IBM client, you can't get it with ours today, is we have different mechanisms for doing transaction load balancing. We have different mechanisms for doing connection pooling and session pooling, transaction pooling. When it comes to transaction load balancing, accessing a data sharing group, we use the same technology that IBM client does. We'll connect in, we'll get a server list, we'll reconnect to the most available server. We use the same algorithm. It's part of the DRDA protocol. When it comes to connection or session pooling or transaction pooling, we use different technology. We use client-based connection pooling. We don't support DIR to session pooling. We don't support DIR to transaction pooling. I've been begging my engineers, who all report to me, years to do this. And I know it's going to be faster if we do that. The key thing, though, is that it uses less resources, because those connections from the DIR to client into the distributed data facility into the gateway into DB2 are cached on the server side. Metadata is cached. The access plans are cached. Now, you do get refresh of the security credentials, but it can be much, much quicker, not only if you're the same user, but a different user connecting in. And so really appreciate that feedback, and be sure and send me a note and say, hey, you need to start both of those pooling mechanisms on the server side. It's going to be better. We have a lot of customers who aren't necessarily, we have huge customers. We have customers that aren't really big, but they're very vocal, and we love all of our customers. It doesn't matter what you pay in licensing. In fact, if you've been tracking us for years, we don't have a direct license. So we're licensed as part of something else. For us, it's just doing the absolute best job in terms of developing the technology that our enterprise need, so you can be more efficient in connecting and integrating your existing IBM systems with new solutions based on Windows, Azure, Office, SQL, our BizTalk, our platform technologies. And so, I don't care if you have a small AS400 or you just have a DB2 or MQ server. Let us know what you want, and we'll factor that in, okay? We really appreciate the feedback. Additional questions? You can also just ask. I'll repeat them back. Clearly, I'm working in verbose mode. My demos are working in crippled mode. No. Yes? Do we have any framework tie-in for DB2 and Informix connectors? You mean a delivery time frame?
No, do you have the tie-ins available? Can you use the connectors that you demoed with the entity framework?
Oh, sorry, yes. So do we have support for the ND framework with DB2 and Informix? The answer is yes. We have an entity provider for DB2. It supports ND Framework 2 specifically, and it has backwards compatibility from 5 through 6. We're upgrading it to support 6 right now as part of the V10 release, but we have a customer saying they want that now. It's based upon schema to produce the model, not code first. If you want code first, you need to let me know. And in terms of Informix, as soon as we upgrade our DB2 entity provider, we're going to clone it, to be perfectly honest, and then tune it to work over the new 8-init provider for Informix. But if you use the entity framework, you know it's not the most spry technology on the planet, especially fetching schema. We help to tune those schema queries, but we're not doing any caching mechanism, and they'd be kind of brutal at runtime. And so one of the things I'd like to do is probably produce a new common entity framework provider for DRDA to run over the DIR one. I apologize for using DRDA, but it's what it is, right? It's a generic .ND provider over a generic .NET provider over the new client. But I still need the old ND framework provider over the old one, just in case, we have problems with delivering this timeframes. But yeah, absolutely, we fully support the Unity framework. It's also part of our organization, Building 44 at Microsoft, and we try to support everything in the data world we can. The one thing I'm not going to deliver is an ODBC driver for Informix. If you need it, let me know, but I don't think I need to do that. And we're still targeting OLEDB for the SQL consumers, because all 5 of those support OLEDB commonly. Only 2 support ADO.NET, but we are thinking about this next package having the 2 OLEDB providers, the 2 unmanaged DIRTA clients, DB2 and Informix, and then this new stack of .NET DIRTA, ADO.NET DIRTA, stop right there. And then maybe put in the entity. So right now we've got a package for SQL and Office that has all the data stuff in it. And it's just a little cumbersome. So let me know what you want in there and we'll tune that package as well. Unfortunately, we're not going to have our updated data connectors out for the upcoming public SQL 2016 release. We're going to be a little delayed, so we won't be there day one. But yeah, let us know. Are we over?
Yep.
Oh, sorry about that.
No.
Well, with that, we
evaluate.
greatly appreciate your feedback today. Love to have a dialogue with you offline. Be sure and use the community to get a hold of us. Once you know how to get a hold of us, you have questions, concerns, you want access to technology, then you just have to ask. We really appreciate your feedback. Please fill out the evaluations. Apologize for my demos. They all worked, but you hear that from everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. Have a great time.
Thank you.